My 12-year-old niece laughed and said, "Dad says no one in this family really loves you. They just keep you around because you pay for everything." While unwrapping the $1,400 laptop I bought her, everyone laughed, even my parents. I just smiled, stood up and said, "Good to know." The next morning, my brother's business lost its biggest investor, and my family started calling Nonstop. They found a letter in the mail with my signature, and everything changed forever. I, 34M, have been the successful one in my family for about 8 years now. Not because I bragged about it. Not because I threw it in anyone's face. Just because I worked myself into the ground for it, while everyone else coasted. My brother is 3 years older than me. Charming, loud, always the favorite. He was the one who got the car for his birthday, while I got a handshake and a "you'll figure it out." He married young, has a daughter, my niece, 12 years old, and for the last 4 years has been running a mid-sized logistics company that I, quietly and without much fanfare, had invested heavily in. Not because I believed in him particularly. Because I believed in keeping the family together. That's the lie I told myself for years. Retired, living comfortably in a house that I helped pay off 3 years ago, when my father's back surgery wiped out their savings. I didn't make a show of it. I wired the money, told them it was a gift, and moved on. I'm telling you all this because I need you to understand the full picture before I tell you what happened at Christmas. The gathering was at my parents' house. Everyone was there, my brother and his wife, my niece, 2 cousins, an aunt, and my parents. I drove 4 hours to get there. I came with a trunk full of gifts, because that's what I did every year. I never showed up empty-handed. For my parents, I'd brought an envelope with enough money for a week-long trip they'd been talking about for 2 years. For my brother, a watch he'd mentioned once in passing 6 months ago that I'd actually written down so I wouldn't forget. For his wife, a spa package. For my niece, the laptop, a $1,400 machine. She'd been complaining about her old one since August, and I remembered. The evenings started the way these things usually do. Food, noise, the TV too loud in the background. I sat and watched my family the way I always did, slightly outside of it, used to being the one who observes more than participates. My brother held court the way he always did, making everyone laugh, telling stories about his business expanding, casually name-dropping clients. My parents looked at him the way they always had, with a specific kind of pride they never quite turned in my direction. I didn't mind anymore. I thought I didn't anyway. We got to the gifts after dinner. I sat back and watched everyone open what I'd brought. My parents were grateful in the way that felt slightly performative, the way it does when people are more focused on moving on to the next box than sitting with what they've been given. My brother liked the watch. His wife smiled about the spa day. And then, my niece got to the laptop. She tore through the wrapping in about 15 seconds. When she saw what it was, her face lit up the way a kid's face does. Genuinely, completely, without guile. For about 3 seconds, I felt it. That clean feeling of having actually done something that landed. And she looked over at my brother, and he said something to her. I didn't hear it from where I was sitting. I just saw him lean toward her, then say something low, with a smirk on his face. My niece turned back to the laptop, and then she laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one. The kind you do when you've just heard something that strikes you as both funny and true. And then she said it, loudly, casually, the way kids say things when they haven't yet learned that words can be weapons. That her dad said no one in this family really loves me. That they keep me around because I pay for everything. The room went quiet for exactly 1 second. And then people laughed. Not everyone, but enough. My aunt covered her mouth, but her shoulders were shaking. My brother grinned into his drink. His wife looked away, which was its own kind of answer. And my parents laughed. My mother made a sound like it was all a bit much, but still funny. My father didn't even bother with the performance of discomfort. My niece was already turning the laptop over in her hands. The way kids do. I sat with it for a moment. The whole room still buzzing with residual laughter. My brother not quite meeting my eyes, but smiling at the wall. My parents settling back into their chairs. And I smiled. Not because it was funny. Because something shifted in me so fast and so cleanly that it felt like a door closing. I stood up, smoothed my jacket, and said quietly that it was good to know. That was all. Then I went to the kitchen to help clean up, and nobody said anything more about it. I stayed another hour, helped with dishes, said my goodbyes, hugged my niece, because she's 12, and this wasn't her fault. She repeated something she'd been told, by a man who should have known better. I drove 4 hours home in the dark, in the silence, and I did not cry, which surprised me a little. What I did instead was think. I want to be precise about what happened next, because I've seen people tell these stories and make themselves sound more calculated than they were. The truth is messier. I didn't sit down that night with a master plan. What I did was sit at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning with a glass of water and think very clearly about what I actually wanted to do with my life going forward. My brother's logistics company had been growing on the back of a major investor relationship that I had personally brokered. The investor, a contact of mine from years of working in finance, had come in at my recommendation, based on the relationship he had with me and not with my brother. He held a significant stake and had been planning to expand his position in the new year. I picked up my phone and I called him. It was late, but he was a night owl, and we'd talked at all hours before. I told him I needed to be honest with him about some reservations I had. I didn't fabricate anything. I didn't lie. I simply told him, truthfully, that I had been reconsidering my involvement in certain family ventures, and that I thought he deserved to know that my confidence in the investment had changed. I told him the business itself was structurally sound, but that I was withdrawing my personal endorsement, and that if he wanted to reassess his position, I would understand completely. He asked me what had changed. I told him it was personal, and that I'd rather not get into it. He said he'd think about it. I also called my attorney, left a voicemail asking for a call back in the morning. Then I went to bed. I slept better than I had in months. The call from my attorney came at 9. By 10:30, I was in his office. I told him what I needed, and he drafted it while I waited. The letter was not cruel, I want to be clear about that. It was precise, outlined, in formal and unambiguous language, the complete withdrawal of my financial involvement in my brother's company, my investment stake, which I was liquidating per the terms of our agreement, and my personal underwriting of 2 business loans he had taken out that I had co-signed. It also documented for the record the informal financial support I had extended to my family over the past 8 years. The house, the surgery, the holidays, the gifts, framed not as a complaint, but as context. And it closed with a single line that my attorney suggested me soften, and that I told him to leave exactly as I'd written it. That I wished everyone well, but that I would no longer be available in the financial capacity I had previously occupied, effective immediately. I signed it. He made copies. One went to my brother, one went to my parents, one went to the investor as a courtesy, though he'd already made his decision by that point. I know because he called me at 11 that morning to tell me he was pulling out. I sent the letters by courier, priority delivery, and they arrived just before noon. My phone started ringing at 12:07. My mother first, then my brother, then my father, then my brother again, then an unknown number that I later figured out was my brother's business partner. Then my mother again, then my brother's wife. I let every single one go to voicemail. My brother's first message was almost casual. He said he'd gotten something in the mail, and it seemed like there might be some kind of misunderstanding, and could I call him back when I got a chance. His voice was tight, in the way voices are when someone is trying very hard to sound like they're not panicking. His second message, 40 minutes later, was less composed. He said he didn't know what I was trying to do, but that this was going to hurt real people. That his employees had families, that we needed to talk like adults. My mother's message was the one that made me sit with my phone for a long time afterward. She said she didn't understand why I was doing this, and that if this was about last night, then I needed to understand that it was just a joke, and nobody meant anything by it. She said that family doesn't do this to each other. She said she raised me better than this. I played that one twice. The laugh broke something open. Not the joke, I'd heard worse. The laugh. My mother's laugh specifically, because there are people you hold up in your mind as the floor, the last line. The ones who would not cross a certain threshold, no matter what. And when they do, when they cross it laughing, you have to revise something fundamental about how you've been seeing the world. I'm not the villain of this story, but I'm not a hero either. My brother's employees did not deserve the instability I introduced into their working lives. I've thought about that. I've sat with it. What I can say is that I was not responsible for the promises my brother made to them, using money that was ultimately contingent on my goodwill. Goodwill I had given freely for years, and that he had spent carelessly. But I've thought about it. Update 3. It's been about 6 weeks now. My niece sent me a message through her mother's phone. She said she was sorry, and that she hadn't understood what she was saying. It was short, and a little stilted in the way a 12-year-old's apology is when she's been asked by an adult to send it. But something in it felt like it was actually hers. Something in the specific phrasing of it. The way she said she thought it was supposed to be funny, and now she knew it wasn't. I wrote back and told her I knew she hadn't meant to hurt me. I told her I wasn't angry with her, and that I never had been. I meant every word of that. My brother's company is restructuring. He's not going under. He's a survivor. I'll give him that. And he found a smaller regional investor willing to come in at less favorable terms. He'll rebuild. It'll be harder, and it'll take longer, But he'll do it because that's who he is. My parents and I are in a holding pattern, careful. The way things are when something real has happened, and everyone is deciding whether to name it or step around it forever. I suspect we'll step around it. That might be okay. I don't need the confrontation anymore. I just needed to stop pretending. The thing nobody tells you about taking your power back is how quiet it is. I expected something. Relief maybe, or anger finally surfacing, or some dramatic shift in how the world looked. Instead it was just quiet. An ordinary Thursday. An inbox that had gone still, because the calls had slowed and then stopped. A table for one at a restaurant I liked, where I sat for 2 hours with a book and a meal and felt, for the first time in longer than I could account for, like my own company was enough. That probably sounds sad to some people. It didn't feel sad. The last thing I want to say, because people keep asking, is whether I'd do it again. Yes, without question. Not because it was easy, or because I enjoyed it, or because I felt nothing when I watched something I'd spent years building get taken apart in a morning. But because the alternative, returning to that table, writing that check for the trip they'll take without really thinking about me, showing up next Christmas with another gift and the same quiet hope that this time would be different, was no longer something I could make myself do. I'm not done with my family. I don't think I'll ever be completely done, because that's not how families work. And because, despite everything, I love them in the complicated and insufficient way that you love people who shaped you before you knew you had a say in it. But I am done being the bank. I am done funding my own invisibility. I smiled when I stood up that night and said it was good to know. What I didn't say, because I didn't have the words for it yet, was that I was thanking them. They had just told me clearly and without ambiguity exactly where I stood. After 8 years. That kind of honesty was almost a gift. I just made sure I used it wisely. The part that got me, really got me, wasn't the guilt tripping. It was the architecture of it. The way nobody meant anything by it and, you need to understand it was just a joke, came before a single syllable that sounded like an apology. The way the injury was reframed immediately as my overreaction. The way, I raised you better than this, was deployed, cleanly and without irony, by a woman who had laughed. I put my phone face down and went for a walk. I called my brother back that evening. Not because I'd softened, but because I thought he deserved to hear it from me directly, and not through paperwork and silence. He answered on the first ring. He started talking immediately, rapidly, about the business and the timing and the investor, and what this was going to do to the next quarter. I waited until he'd run out of steam. Then I told him calmly that I'd heard what he told his daughter to say to me, that I'd watched the room laugh, that I'd watched our parents laugh, and that I was done being the person who pays for the privilege of being tolerated. He was quiet for a moment. Then he told me that I was being dramatic, that his daughter was 12 and didn't understand what she was saying, that it was a joke between adults and I'd always been too sensitive. I told him I agreed that she was 12, and that he was 41 and had chosen to tell her to say it. He didn't have an answer for that. After a few seconds, he asked me what it would take to fix things. Not in the way someone asks when they want to understand. In the way someone asks when they want to know the number. The price. The cost to make the inconvenience go away. I told him there wasn't a number. That I wasn't doing this to negotiate. That I was doing it because I needed to, and because it was the only honest thing left to do. He called me ungrateful. I actually laughed at that one. Not with cruelty, just genuine surprise. Then I told him I'd be in touch, through my attorney, if there was anything formal to discuss, and I ended the call. Update 1. I've gotten a lot of messages since I first posted this, asking what happened after. Specifically whether my brother's business actually went under, and whether my parents ever apologized. I'll try to be straightforward about both. The business didn't collapse overnight. Businesses rarely do. But the investor pulling out created a hole they weren't prepared for. And when that news moved through the professional network the way these things do, a second potential partner who had been in early conversations quietly stepped back too. My brother spent most of January doing damage control. I know this, not because anyone told me, but because a cousin who was not involved in any of it, reached out just to check on me, and mentioned, without editorializing, that things were rough over there. My parents called 6 more times over the course of the following 2 weeks. I answered once, my mother, about 10 days after Christmas. She had moved past the initial panic by then, and into something that felt more like genuine hurt, which was harder to sit with. She told me she hadn't realized how serious it was, and that she was sorry I felt the way I did. There was something real in it, but it was still framed as my feelings being the problem, that she was sorry I felt that way, not that she was sorry for laughing. I told her I appreciated her calling. I told her I loved her. I also told her that what had happened was going to take time for me to work through, and that I needed her to let me do that without pressure. She didn't like that, but she accepted it. We've talked twice since then, and both conversations were careful in a way that made me a little sad, the way things are careful when something underneath has shifted, and everyone knows it, but no one says it. My brother has not apologized. I did not expect him to. Update 2. What I want to explain, because I've seen a lot of comments assuming this was a pure power play, a revenge fantasy, a calculated dismantling, is that it wasn't clean like that. None of this felt good in the way people seem to want it to. When I signed that letter, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired and clear-headed in a way I hadn't in years, which is a different thing entirely. The honest version is this. I had spent 8 years making myself indispensable to people who did not particularly value me. Not because they were monsters. Because I let them. Because I paid for the right to belong and told myself it was generosity. The laptop, the house, the surgery, the watch, I called all of it love, when a lot of it was something closer to a toll. A payment I made to stay in a family where I had never quite felt like I fit.